Hola, buenos días.
Bueno, kaixo, egunon guztioi, eta ongi etorri hizketaldi saiaren saio berri honetara. Buenos días a todas y bienvenidas a esta nueva sesión de la sección Conversaciones. Hoy tenemos la suerte.
Welcome everyone. Here we are lucky to have the whole team of the film that is going to close the film festival, Living on Time, directed by John Crowley, that is here, written by Nick Payne over there, and main star Andrew Garfield. I ask you to a big applause from everyone, for all of them.
Important.
Bueno, siempre solemos...
We usually start with a very similar question in all the projects, and is, which is the seed of this film? How was the process in which you got involved, each of you got involved into the project?
The seed, I suppose, was the original idea. It's interesting, I saw the finished film with a bit of distance a few weeks ago, and I remembered that I started writing it in the pandemic in about 2020, I think, when there was a lockdown. And you all haven't seen the film, is that right? So I won't say too much, but the themes, I suppose, of love and, I dare say, death and people being ill and getting through those things. And I think watching the film years and years later, I realized it was really a collection of all the things I was worrying about in that period. And I had young children at the time, and I was interested in parenthood. And that was the germ of the idea. And then it came to John, the script, in about 2022, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, the seed was a text from Nick. And we had worked together before. I had directed a play by Nick in the Donmar Warehouse. And we had talked about another couple of projects in the meanwhile. I got a very customary, humble text from Nick saying, there's a script coming your way. I'd love you to read it, but don't worry if you don't want to read it. So of course I'm going to read it. So I read it, and I was struck by how powerful and how sad it was, and I was a little bit resistant to it. At first I was like, ooh, this is hard. Until I got to, there's one scene, it's a spoiler alert. It's fair to say, there's a birth scene in it, and I've found myself laughing and crying in it, and the full spin of emotions, and then it turned into something very profound, the scene itself, that I knew I was in and going to spend the next 2 years of my life with it.
And then I'm Andrew, and
Hola, soy...
I received a text. No, I did receive a text from John, and because John and I had made a film called Boy A, which was a long time ago, which was 17 years ago, we discovered. Yeah, scary. And we had wanted to make something together since then. It was my second film, I think it was your second film. And we had tried to make a few things together, and nothing quite worked. And then again with Nick's script, I was in the middle of taking a break from everything. I was going through my own personal journey with my own grief. I was entering a midlife crisis. I say that with a laugh because it was a light midlife crisis, and it continues now. I'm right in the middle of it now. And it's okay, I'm here with you. What a great way to spend my midlife crisis. In a good way. You know, I think we all have to go through a midlife crisis. It's a positive experience of disassembling and reassembling. And I was just considering and thinking about life and death and existence and looking back and looking forward and wondering what we are doing here on this planet and how do we make it as meaningful as possible. And then I read this script that is literally about life and death and what we are doing on this planet and how we make it as meaningful as possible. And I thought, oh, this is kind of some version of the inside of my own heart right now. This feels like I can continue to take a break while doing this film. And it was like the film was a part of my taking time off. It felt like part of the holiday or the vacation or the exploration that I was doing. It didn't feel like work. And it felt just like a very easy thing to be excited about because I've loved Nick's writing for so long. Obviously, I've loved John for so long. And then we found that Florence Pugh wanted to do it. And it was it became an entirely exciting and terrifying prospect because then we knew we had to do it. And she wishes she could be here. She's very, very sad not to be here, particularly because she loves to eat. And she's also disappointed to not be able to be in the room with you all and present the film, but mostly because of the eating. But anyway, so yeah, it all became this, and then the process itself kind of followed that very seamless, sweet, gentle, I wouldn't say easy because the work was hard, but it was very pleasurable and it flowed. The work was hard unto itself. There was no other extra difficulties that were unnecessary. Everyone was honed in on the same North Star, I guess.
No voy a desvelar nada de la película.
I'm not going to spoil anything about the film. As you said, nobody has seen it, but the film is about love and life, and inside this gender of this film that talk about love and gender, it does in a very little archetype way from the moment in which the two people meet, with things that have to do with masculinity, the feminine person, even the search of a child that is from a place which is not an easy part. Well, there's something very real in the whole film. We like to see it from different perspectives, but from the writing aspect, how do you approach this thing?
Like all or most writing, it's a real mix of autobiographical things. So without going into too much detail, back when I was writing it, I had one child, she was very young. We were trying to have another child. I had lots and lots of friends who were going through that experience. And the strange thing about being a writer is that often people are telling you stories that are kind of incredible or really sad. And on the one hand, you're really listening and you're really empathizing. And on the other hand, your brain is going, this is great. If you're not going to write it down, make sure you log it. So there's lots of stories that were coming up, and I'm roughly the age of the characters in the film, so a lot of that was me trying to capture a moment that I was living through. And then a mix of research, and I'm trying to think how to say it without spoilers, but going to talking to people that have been through those experiences that are dramatized in the film. So I suppose becoming a parent and those kind of things. And then the last bit is imagination, and I suppose I just really followed the characters and kind of let them take me wherever they wanted to go. And part of that, I suppose, is expressed through the form of the film, which is 3 timelines. I don't think this is spoiling anything, which is, roughly speaking, you get kind of the first year of the couple's relationship that Andrew and Florence play. You get 1 day, which is the birth of their child, and then you get the kind of end of their relationship, shall we say. And once I'd kind of hit on that, I felt like, great, I can just follow these people through time anywhere I like. And in a way, I felt or hoped that would illuminate the question of the film, which in some ways is, how do you spend your time when you know it's going to end? How do you find value in that? What is valuable? Is it sitting in a bath? eating biscuits that may be of great value to you and really important, or it might be more profound things. And hopefully the film tries to mix all of those together, yeah.
Y claro, esta parte que está en la
Of course, this part that is in the writing, how do you transfer that into the cinematographic to put this into images? How did you translate all this into images?
Andrew Garfield and Florence Pugh to be in it, and so that you have, and that was the emotional heart of it. And I think maybe, you know, my approach to the visual side of the film was to work from the inside out rather than approaching it from a sort of construct or imposing on it. It was working with a fabulous team, wonderful DP, Stuart Bentley, and Alice Normington, who's a great production designer, to figure out what the heart of each scene was and then to find the physical expression of that second. You know, there's a mixture of tones in the film. There's a mixture of periods, obviously locations, and kinds of locations. So the one sort of basic one that we adopted in the style was that there are a lot of locations or places in the film which we used to call liminal, which is to say they're particularly sort of not very glamorous locations. There's sort of A roads, you know, petrol stations, corridors of a hospital. They're places you pass through in life that you don't really want to spend too much time on them. You're going from A to Z, and on one of these, the couple meet, and they're slightly cold, anonymous-ish places, but there's a very particular personality to the non-personality of them in England that we wanted to get right, okay? And in contrast to that, you have the two homes that these people are making and the way that they unfurl. And the first time we see Tobias and Almut together, after they spend the first night together, you see Almut's environment is sort of unfinished. She hasn't unpacked in this flat that she's living in. And the first time we meet Tobias, he's living in his father's spare room, and I won't say why, but so there's a sort of temporariness about where you meet them, and then you see them building a very beautiful life together, like almost in a primal way, like creating a nest. And the warmth of that was in contrast to the sort of coolness of the others. And I don't say coolness in a way that I'm trying to suggest that it's cold. There's a lot of humor in Nick's writing, and a lot of humor in those set pieces of them battling their way to get either, you know, to the hospital on time, or, you know, no spoiler alert, but I won't, yeah. So that was the sort of compass that we used, which is what's in the heart of the writing, and then how you create an environment for the most truthful performances to emerge and illuminate the emotions at the core of the writing.
Y mencionabas ahora
You mentioned the acting. For you to go through so many vital moments of a person that in a film is such a short film, but the real work is to investigate many different vital aspects of the character. How did you work that aspect?
I think it was written very well, first of all, and I think both the characters were written so specifically, and it enabled myself and Florence a kind of a very, very clear roadmap. And yet it left so much space as well simultaneously. There's this very strange magic trick that Nick's writing does, which is, it is so precise, it's so specific, but to say the same thing about imagination, it allows an actor to bring all of their own imagination to the skeleton that has been presented, to the track, to the kind of the form of these characters. It leaves space for that particular actors' interpretation, their own soul to come and fill in the cracks and the gaps and put flesh on the bone and put blood in the veins and connect mind to heart to body. It's great writing, and also, you know, we had discussions at the beginning about Tobias and about certain things that, and I think what was really exciting, one of the things that I think excited all of us about Tobias specifically was that it was a different form of masculinity, a different type of leading man, a kind of everyman who had the confidence of his own quietness and not needing to bash his chest like a alpha male, but knew he had access to his alpha maleness if it was needed. And there was, I think, maybe just one moment that we adjusted just to kind of like tweak. And there's a moment where a door gets kicked down, and you'll see, if you see the film, who does the kicking. But in the original script, it was someone else that did the kicking. And I said, no, it has to be me that does the kicking. This is the moment where he becomes almost like a mother bear lifting a car off of her dying child. Like those superhuman moments that fill people that you just go, where did that come from? And so I think that was really fun to play with. That Tobias was such a sweet, gentle, considerate, sensitive soul, and particularly at the beginning of the film, where he's someone that is he draws between the lines. He thinks he'll be rewarded by life if he draws between the lines, but I think what he starts to understand as he meets this amazing woman, this character that Florence plays, Almut, that he needs to allow himself to be in great danger in order to live a life that is at all vital, at all full of life, at all close to what his heart wants. And the risk and the courage involved in that and the absolute terror involved in that is what kind of enlivens him and calls him into life. And I think you know, John does set up an environment where actors get to feel what a scene is take to take, or call up different parts of the character take to take. And I think what was fun for me was to undermine this sweet, sensitive man and show that he does have teeth, and show that he does have a fierceness, show that he can let go and he can be wild, and then come back to drawing between the lines, like finding the drift in between, all along the spectrum of, and I think that's the other thing about life, is that when we're really in the middle of the shit and the stuff and the mess and the hell of life, it wakes up resources and aspects of us that we didn't know were there. So I think he's even shocked by his own behavior sometimes, and that was very, very fun to play. I think that's true for all of us, is that there are certain things that arise in us only when they're needed, and usually they're only needed when we're in trouble, and we spend our lives trying to avoid trouble for the most part. And I think this film is a kind of advocate for the right kind of trouble for us all to get into.
Sí, incluso, bueno, Florence no está aquí, pero sí que creo que ahora hablamos.
Well, Florence is not here, but we're talking about well-written female characters that tell all the details, and more complex characters. For instance, the first date, I see some kind of a role exchange, and as opposed to other films, they're little details, but they're very significant, and the film shows them very well. The time and playing with time. I was wondering how much has been written, how much of the film was written during the editing, once you've seen all the material you had, and how much has it changed from the initial script to the point where you had all the footage and started editing?
The structure of the film changed because you know, the essence of what Nick had written with 3 time frames already didn't have a beginning, a middle, and end in the correct order. And then we just turned it on its head again in the edit. So it's fair to say that the order of scenes is slightly different, particularly at the beginning and at the end. But that's what you often find in an edit. But what we were working with were these, like, it's like making a mosaic, and you've got these beautifully formed tiles which are glittering, and on their own are, the light is hitting them in an exquisite way. And you just want each tile to talk to the one that's next to it. And it took us a long time to figure out how to put them all together. And I was chatting to Nick yesterday as we were traveling in, you know, about some of the editing process. And there was one point where we did a really brutal cut on it. I mean, but we had to, and it was for nobody else's eyes other than myself and the editor, which was literally because we were getting lost, and it's very complicated material. And then you knew what to begin to put back in, and we began to feed back in, and then it began to sort of breathe and speak and get better. We then went and shot one more day's worth of material on one of the, again, spoiler alert, large sort of competition set piece events. And that was very interesting because we did 2 test screenings, one in London and one in New York, which played fantastically. And the only criticism was the point at which something happened. Right? It wasn't the fact of it happening, it was just the point. It was, so we had to go back and shoot a bit more of something, and I can't give it away. Sorry, I'm being vague. But we went and shot a little bit more, and then that sort of allowed a lot more detail. We also shot a bit more stuff between Andrew and Florence for that scene, and that created a fuller version of that scene. So there wasn't, other than that what was written for that day's shooting, there was no further writing done in the editing process. We were just working with what we had shot during the shoot, and reordering, recutting, reshaping in order to try and find the most potent, most balanced, most sort of complete shape for it, which would spin between the humor and the sadness and the playfulness and the profundity of it in a way that would be surprising to its audience. You know, one of the things that I'm aware, each time I talk about the complicated structure, it can sound a bit forbidding. And one of the things that I loved about the script from the start is that there's a very open gesture in the film, which is it wants to play with its audience. You know, that the first 10 minutes is a little bit settling down with the jumping around in time. But once you get it, it's a sort of warm dialogue with its viewer, rather than a confrontational one of trying to throw you out of the material. It's trying to express what it's like to be on the inside of a very rich relationship, which is bound by a time limit.
No sé si alguien tiene alguna pregunta.
Does anybody have any questions? Let's ask from the top and just progress down if you would like that.
I'm a person that it's still going through a process of grieving, so just watching the trailer, I cried a lot. And I would like to know which emotional toll it took, not only for Andrew, but for the rest of the people working on the film, during and at the end of it, seeing the final result, which emotional toll it took for everyone involved.
I'll start. Thank you for the question. I hope you have good support for whatever you're going through. Speaking of support, I feel like when I've been in the center, in the heart of my grief, of course it's loved ones that I feel mentorship from and care from. But not only that, I feel it from nature. I feel it, and not only that, I feel it from art. I feel it from other people's creativity. I feel it from literature. I feel it from film. I feel it from theater, music. sculpture, painting, I feel like it's someone reaching a hand across time and space and saying, me too, you're not alone, this is universal. And that is some of the most beautiful stuff that human beings get to do for each other. And I think for me, this process, it didn't feel like I was digging up old wounds, or it didn't feel like it was a challenge in that way. It actually felt very generative, very generous. I was talking to Nick a second ago, and it's like, well, what's a sculptor going to do when they're going through grief? What's a poet going to do when they're going through grief? They're going to go to that empty page or the unmolded clay, and they're going to create some shape out of the shape that their soul is taking on at that very moment. That's all that we can do as artists, as creative people, is that we can respond to the world, we can respond to what's happening in our lives and try to express it for ourselves, for our own healing, but also for the healing of an audience, for the healing of people walking through an art gallery. So for me, it felt very healing, it felt very generative. It actually felt like it helped me stay close to the truth of my grief, the truth of my longings, the truth of my joys. It was a beautiful healing. It was honestly sad when it was over, because suddenly I didn't have a studio to mold clay anymore. I didn't have a studio to paint or to write in such a kind of organized, form-filled way with other people who wanted to do the same and collaborate in their grief. So it was a beautiful healing thing. Yeah, it was a gorgeous thing for me.
I think that the working with your stuff is a very interesting thing. Whatever your emotional core is emotionally, and it's hard for it not to creep into the room on whatever you're doing. So making the film was a very, very truthful, joy-filled process. But there were times on set where I would joke with the director of photography that it was a bit like crying for a living, because we would watch these actors doing these extraordinary scenes, and it's very hard not to be moved by it, no matter how many times you watch it, okay? But you're aware that that's what's special, what's being created. The work there is beautiful acting, meeting beautiful writing, meeting a really well-mounted shot, and you're capturing something that ultimately will be pieced together and can go out, and if it works, you never know, if it works, can touch people, it can reach people, and not just leave them in a sad place, not go, here, life's shit, it's really sad, there you go. Go through it and sort of come out the other side and see both sides. There's a line I've mentioned a couple of times when we've been talking about this, which is a line from a Lou Reed song, which is, he said, there's a bit of magic in everything and then some loss to even things out. And that sort of polarity is in the film. I will say, if you're asking what the toll was, I would say after 6 months of editing, I've never been more exhausted, and I would come home every night, and it's very hard to watch. You're giving technical notes on the edit, working on it, through tears, because it's moving, because it's very hard to not be moved by truthful emotion. It's not sentimental emotion. There's a very big difference between it. So, yeah, tiring, but in the best possible way, I guess.
I think the strange bit for me is the toll, although it's a small one, is when I'm writing and I'm on my own. And I'm the kind of writer who, I'm not outside the thing observing the characters, as it were. I'm kind of in there with them, in the room. So if they're having a great time, I'm sort of delighted. If they're not having a great time, I am kind of on my own weeping with them. It's quite strange. But the other thing about grief, I suppose, to go back to the top bit of your question, is I do believe or hope or think there's a bit where you sort of get to this kind of catharsis. And the nice bit for me, I mean, the really kind of delightful bit is when I get to, if I go on set or I sort of, and there's a big, again, no spoilers at all, there's a big argument scene that Andrew and Florence do. And I was sort of crammed into a room, you know, in the house where they're just on the other side of the wall. And I saw their first take of this big row. And there were kind of two things. I was incredibly moved at the content of the scene, afresh, because you really experience it again through what everyone on set is working to do. But also, and to go back to your question about how Andrew prepared or how he sort of navigated the non-linearness, it was just such a joy and a privilege to see two people who are so well prepared and so good at their job that I sort of couldn't believe my luck. So I was incredibly moved. And that was years after writing that first draft, you know. So although there's the strange bit where you're on your own having a little cry in your dressing gown, there's then this kind of amazing moment where you get to see it come to life. And that felt very cathartic, yeah.
Good morning. Thank you for being here with us. My question was, and it's for all the crew, but in particular, how do you prepare with Florence, Andrew, for this part? Because I think it's really hard for all the team to have very powerful scenes of arguments or sadness. It was many rehearsals with John and maybe with Nick. I don't know if you were here on the rehearsals, or it was maybe the privilege of being spontaneous on the set and see what it goes off all the work that you did before. How does it work with Florence to play a couple like this with hard times? Thank you.
Nice to see you. How you doing? We met before in a bar.
Yes.
Nothing weird, just in a bar. We had a lovely chat, and it's a good question.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, no, actually, I'm not wearing my glasses, but I can still see. It's a question that we've had a lot, asked a lot, in different ways, because I think the framing usually is about chemistry, and about how you can create something intimate and quite vulnerable with another actor. And yeah, it was something that I was really, I'll speak for Florence as well, we were both very scared about, because we didn't know each other. We had never met. When we were both cast, we had had a Zoom conversation, and then we met to present together at the Oscars the next day, and we had seen each other at a party, and we were both just kind of like, what do we do? How do we behave with each other? Because knowing, having read Nick's script, that we were going to have to do something quite scary, vulnerable, naked, in all ways, literally, metaphorically, emotionally. So yeah, it was very, very nerve-wracking, because you don't know if your work styles are going to match. You don't know whether your personalities are going to match. You don't know whether you're going to like each other. And John basically had an instinct that this was a good pairing. And obviously, I've been a fan of Florence's work, so I knew that she was talented. I knew that she was one of the great actors of her generation. I knew that, so there was that. But then I say it was a slow process, but in retrospect, it wasn't. It was quite fast. It felt slow because I don't know, I really wanted to make sure that we were going step by step. But I think because we had 2 weeks of rehearsal, that was great. And John made sure of that. That was wonderful. Just for us to be in a room, nothing crazy. We would read scenes. We blocked one scene, which is the birth scene, which you'll understand when you see it. We needed to block it ahead of time so that we knew what the structure of it was. But otherwise, it was us, just the three of us, sometimes the four of us, in a room together, just gently getting to know each other and taking our time. And then, thank God, as we started shooting, we realized we were both really, really devoted to the work. First and foremost, we were both really professional. We were both on time. We were both ready, prepared. And then what was a revelation, I think, for both of us, was that we acknowledged that we were both very generous with each other. And that, I tell you, as you know, as an actor, it's a gift when you're in a scene with someone who isn't just thinking about how they're performing or how they're looking, when you can feel them trying to move you and change you and support you and where your character needs to go. And when you can forget there's a camera, when you just are two souls in the mystery of a moment. Suddenly, I think I understood that on day 3, and then it deepened from there. It became more and more safe. We both acknowledged and could say to each other how safe we were with each other. And then suddenly it was like, oh, well, if we're safe, we can do anything. We can go anywhere within the bounds of this relationship. And yeah, at a certain point, this is a spoiler, I suppose, but at a certain point, she's on all fours, naked, and my head is right by her rear end. And it was like the most natural thing in the world for both of us to be experiencing at that point together in the shoot. So it's amazing privilege to be in that position and to be trusted with that position and to have someone say, you're fine, you're okay. And for me to be checking in and saying, is this still okay? What do you need? Like, there was something so, I don't know, when we can care for each other and respect each other and know what each other's boundaries are, suddenly there's a lot of freedom that comes. Funnily enough, when we really respect what each other's limits are, that's when freedom can come. And it's a really beautiful thing. So that's a testament to Florence as an actor, and I suppose to all of us, and the set that John created so that we could all feel safe to be naked in all the ways that these characters have to be naked. But yeah, it's a good question.
I'll say being on the other side of that, yeah. The whole idea of an instinct of where it's guesswork. And, you know, it's an informed guess, but I knew Andrew's work very well, obviously, and I knew what was important to him as an actor. And I had seen Florence's work. I'd never met her, but I'd seen her work. And you just get a feeling from an actor's work that they're serious about the work, right? And they're both, I think, very, very well cast for their roles, so you hope that it's not going to be too difficult for them to actually fit into the clothing, right? But there were a few moments in the rehearsals where it was very relaxed, very low-key, very much not going to the emotional place that the scenes were going to demand, where I could just feel them beginning to fall towards each other as actors, which is to begin to respond. You could feel the scenes beginning to warm up already, and it was like trying to pull back 2 racehorses from running too fast already. But the thing is, once we started shooting it, the key thing for me they both are serious about the work. And I don't mean that about being on time or about that. It's that as well. The professionalism is that. No, what I mean is that when you start shooting the scene, they're both creatures that want to go after what's behind the scene. It's not just, oh, well, we did the scene. It's good. I'm happy with that. It's like they are hungry. And sometimes they might do it in 3 takes, and they've got it. And I would always say to them, do you want one more? And they would know if they've broken through. And sometimes they would go, yeah, you know, if they're hungry and ambitious on a creative level for what more is behind the scene in order to get the scene, if that makes sense. And that's what the chemistry is for me, is that the space between them is thrillingly alive. And yeah, it was a very also beautiful thing to observe, 2 actors trusting each other and that much playfulness, because the mood on set in the middle of some very sad scenes, and also that was part of the tone of some of Nick's writing, is he has a brilliant way of writing a joke in the middle of a very sad scene. But the way in which then Florence and Andrew would catch those jokes, it was like watching trapeze artists spin from one to, you know, that's thrilling. So, yeah.
That's very kind. Thank you, John. And yeah, and I think one of the things that is a kind of, and I'm sure there's other actors and artists in the room, I'm sure there are filmmakers in the room, I'm sure you'll feel the same way. It's a curse or a gift. I don't know what it is. It can be one thing one day or another thing the other day. But whenever and I think all of us here, whenever we lock into a project, whenever we dive in or sink in, or however you want to say it, whenever the train is in motion on a project, for me, it becomes life and death. It becomes more important than anything else. And it's like something takes over. Some other spirit enters the room, and I have to just kind of follow. So there's what did Martha Graham call it? The divine dissatisfaction. There's this divine dissatisfaction as that just. And when I'm not working, I don't have it. I'm very content. As soon as I start working, it's there. It's like it's never enough. And that could be on a beautiful family film, or it could be on something as dramatic as this. But like it's this weird spirit that kind of takes over, that doesn't let me let go of anything ever. And it's so ferocious, and it's like a hungry animal. And I think it is because we're so privileged to be in the position we're in, and it fucking matters. And I think like we get shy to say that storytelling and the art matters as much as, say, curing cancer. Like it's medicine. It is medicine. Story and art is medicine for people. It's soul medicine. You can tell the kind of the mental, emotional wellness of a culture by how a government values the arts. And I think I feel that very strongly, because art and story and film and theater, and it's saved my life over and over and over again. So I think when I'm in that position, I'm not in control of it, but something makes me like a dog with a bone in a way that I won't let it go until like someone kicks me off of it. So it's I'm sorry to John for that, but it's a wonderful, I think we're both very similar in that way. So it's
You're passionate.
Solo tenemos tiempo para una pregunta más. Pues ahí, esa chica de ahí.
Hi. My question is especially for Nick, but of course it's open for everyone. As a writer myself, I feel like your journey began much earlier than when other people comes, and that vulnerability and the delicacy of the story feels very personal to you. So I want to know how this feeling and these emotions changed over time, because when others get the script, the journey for you has in a way finished, but it's also starting. So I want to know how this emotion changed over time, and if maybe it became something that wasn't just yours and became bigger and you shared with someone, or it's just something that you handed over as this delicate snowball of Christmas kind of thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, what a good question. Can you hear me? Yeah. I think in this case, handing it over was a dream. You knew you were going to, as John said, we had worked together before on a play and had almost worked together on a film. And I knew that John was the person to work on this material, because he so loves actors and acting, and it's more or less just Florence and Andrew for the whole film. And then I suppose when we did a bit of rehearsal, and I came into the room for maybe 2-3 days, I think it was, and to big up Andrew's process again, I sort of caught a glance of his script, and I hope you won't mind me saying, it was completely covered with annotations, right? And so from my point of view, that is exactly what you want. It's exactly what I want. You want the people making the thing to take a level of ownership that completely outstrips you, really, I think. You're one brain, you kind of dreamt it up, it's a bit weird. And then you get all these brains, and you look around the production office and there's so many people working on it. And of course, if you have experiences where you don't get that level of care or you don't get that level of attention, yeah, it can be kind of heartbreaking. And you feel like people aren't sort of holding the thing that you dreamt up. But in this case, I couldn't believe it. When I went into rehearsal, and as Andrew said about, the note about kicking the door, there's another bit which I must just mention. Hopefully when you see it, you'll see. Andrew was kind of, it was like he was inside it through his character's point of view, but he was kind of also able to view the narrative as a whole, as far as I could tell. And Florence Pugh's character, Alma, is a chef. And Andrew said, I think I'm remembering this right, wouldn't it be really cool if we saw him try her food for the first time? And it's in the film, and it's one of my favorite little moments, I think. So I was extremely fortunate in this case that, it's nerve-wracking because it's a bit nerve-wracking, but I mean, I'm over the moon and incredibly lucky, so yeah.
Bueno, creo que nos quedaríamos aquí.
I think we could stay here a long time.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Is this on? No.